Chapter 14, Little Green Men. Okay, here we go. Max kept staring at all the people with green skin filling the large warehouse space below him. When they started the day, none of these people had ever thought they would end up spending the night on an army cot in a cold warehouse under basic arrest just because their skin was a different color. Those sort of things just didn't happen anymore in this country. But here it was happening to hundreds, all because no one understood what was causing the skin color change or if it was contagious. Max pulled his jacket tighter across his chest. The place was going to get very cold before the night was out. The army was going to have to bring in heaters pretty soon, or the people down there on that concrete floor were going to be suffering from a lot more than a skin problem. I think making you a doctor is our only hope, Tess said. I can try to hold the illusion with as many as I can while you go down there with a cure. Max shook his head, not looking at her or the sheriff. That's just not going to work. There are too many people. If she's willing to try, I say let's go for it, Valenti said. Max shook his head. He didn't like the fact that Valenti saw no other option. The sheriff usually had some good ideas of his own. Tess would help, but she never came up with a real plan. As usual, it all fell to Max. And he had to come up with something. Around them, the balcony was silent. He could feel the tension from the other two caused by his firm answer. Sorry, he said. There's just got to be another way. We just haven't found it yet. If we have to try that idea, we'll do it later, but when more people are asleep. Both Tess and Valenti nodded. Max forced himself to look up from the floor full of people and study the walls and roof. The warehouse was made of wood and needed to be painted since the last coat of army green had long ago faded. High windows around the balcony area lit the warehouse during the day, but they were so dirty it was amazing any light got through them. Large light fixtures hung down over the open space like floating ships. Too bad those big lights didn't let off enough heat to warm this place. Like focusing a camera, Max suddenly paid attention to the pipes running along the wooden ceiling. A fire sprinkler system. He studied it, following one pipe after another. From what he could tell, it covered the entire area of the building and the balcony and more than likely the front area with sprinklers spaced every 15 or 20 feet. They extended down from the ceiling about half a foot like small red starbursts. He pointed upward and nudged the sheriff. What kind of water supply would feed those sprinklers in a place like this? Valenti followed where he was pointing. Depends. I've seen older ones with water supplies on the roof. Others run off the city water with supply tanks only as backup. It would depend on the water supply to these warehouses, I guess. Perfect, Tess said, staring at the sprinklers over them. Simple and perfect. Maybe, Max said. We have to solve two problems first. One is the water supply. Can we get to it? Valenti frowned. Tess peered into the darkness if she could find the answers without moving. Max turned and headed back for the door to the stairs. He didn't remember seeing any more stairs leading upward into the stairwell, but he bet that's where they would be. Valenti followed him. Tess remained by the rail. Max was irritated that she didn't seem to be trying to help until he remembered how much effort she had used convincing the guards that the two of them were doctors. He wondered if his feelings about Tess would ever stop being mixed. When he reached the door, he stopped. His theory was close to being right. There was a ladder on the wall beside the stair doorway. The ladder led up to a closed trap door in the roof 20 feet above the balcony. I don't know if we can climb up there without being seen, Valenti said, giving voice to the very fear Max had. Sheriff, you and I have to try, Max turned. Tess kept looking at them over her shoulder. He went to her side. Tess, you keep an eye on anyone below who happens to look up this way. Try to block what they are seeing if you can. I can do that, she said. She moved over to a spot where she could see the floor below fairly well and then nodded to Max to go ahead. Max went back to the door. He wondered if the people below could hear him moving around. He hoped not. The sheriff started to go first, but Max stopped him. If that's locked up there, I need to be in front to open it. Valenti nodded. I'll wait until you're on the roof. Good, Max said. Then moving as smoothly and silently as he could, he climbed the wooden ladder. His fear had been right. There was a padlock at the top of the ladder, and it took him a moment to unlock it, holding onto the ladder with one hand while grabbing the lock with the other. He was very high above the ground. Not that he was afraid of heights, but hanging with one hand on an old wooden ladder wasn't his idea of a fun Sunday evening. He got the lock loose and pushed the trapdoor open, then climbed up onto the roof. Down below, Tess glanced up and nodded, then went back to focusing on making sure anyone below who looked up wasn't going to see the sheriff climbing the ladder. Max held the trapdoor barely open until Valenti got near it, pulled it all the way back so that the sheriff could climb through, then closed it behind him. The roof was dark and even colder than inside. A slight wind was blowing from the west, and the lights of Roswell lit the sky to the south. It was a nice night, but not one Max had time to enjoy. The roof was made of black tar, and the shapes of the fans, pipes, and other stuff sticking out made Max feel as if he'd walked into a horror fun land at a carnival. The shadows were everywhere and seemed to move in the wind, even though Max knew that was his imagination. Where would the water tank be? If there is one, Valenti said, my guess it would be covered in a building of protection of some sort. Walk lightly, our footsteps might echo into the warehouse below. Max nodded, feeling like he needed to whisper as well as tiptoe. Valenti pointed to a shape looming off the roof on the other side, a faint shape against the lights of Roswell beyond. They started towards it, moving carefully. The closer they got, the more the shape looked like a small building stuck on a flat roof like an afterthought. I bet that's the utility area, Valenti said. A water tank would be in there, and the electrical access and the plumbing from the city water. Another padlock was on the room's door, but Max opened it quickly. A black room greeted them, the door seemingly an entrance into nothingness. There just wasn't enough surrounding light to illuminate the inside. Valenti stepped into the darkness, and Max waited, standing to one side of the door to give him what little light he could. There's a switch by the door here, Valenti said. Come in and close the door so I can turn it on. Max stepped inside and closed the door, plunging them into pitch blackness. There wasn't even a speck of light coming in under the door. Good, light from the inside wouldn't show up to someone happening to look up this way. A moment later, Valenti turned on the light, shocking Max with the brightness of one bare bulb. There, Valenti said, pointing to a large tank that filled most of the left side of the room. They both moved over and studied the rusted metal tank. It was about 10 feet tall and as wide around as a house. A valve on one side of it with a large handle said water cutoff. This tank feeds the automatic sprinkler system, Valenti said, pointing at the big thing. And it is refilled by the pipe here from the base's water supply. So is there enough water in that tank to get everyone below wet? Max asked. Valenti laughed. More than enough. You set that off and they're going to think that they're in a spring cloud burst. Just from that tank? Max asked. Just from the water in the tank if it's full, Valenti said. Then we need to shut off the water supply to it, Max said. No point in diluting the cure once it's on the people. Good point, Valenti said. Max looked around at the electrical panels and other pipes. Think we can trigger the system from here? No, Valenti said. We're going to need some heat on the sensors down below, I'm afraid. Max had figured that would be the case. He could set off the sensors, heat them up enough to trigger the water, but it was going to be risky doing so with army guards all around. Okay, Max said, moving over to the center of the big tank. Boost me up on top so I can put some of the plasma in the water. Max couldn't bring himself to call it his own blood. He was thinking of it as a cure, not that he was bathing people in his blood cells. Valenti locked his fingers together and boosted Max up on the tank, banging one toe as he did on the side of the tank, sending a bell-like sound through the room. Max froze, holding his breath until the sound faded. Wonder what that sounded like down below, Valenti whispered. Max didn't want to think about that. Carefully, he moved to the center of the tank where there was a hatch, more than likely used to let workers down inside to clean the thing. He opened the hatch and looked down at the black surface of the water. It's full, he whispered. Good, Valenti said. I'm turning off the base water refill. Max opened up one of the small jars that Liz had given him and dumped it in. It didn't seem like much in that huge volume of water. He studied it for a moment, then took out another jar and emptied it as well. He might as well make sure that there was enough plasma cells in the water to make the cure work. That left one in his pocket for anything else that might come up. This was the only chance they had to help these people. He closed and secured the hatch on the tank, then with Valenti's help crawled down without making any more loud sounds. 3 minutes later, they were back beside Tess on the balcony. Any problems? Max asked as he knelt beside her and looked at the green people below. A couple of guards looked up here and saw only shadows, Tess said, and her little bell ringing made a few look at the ceiling, but nothing else. How about you? Treatment in the sprinkler water supply, Max said. We're ready to go, Valenti said. Let's get back by the stairwell, Max said. Tess, be ready to put disguises on us with anyone we meet. I'm always ready, she said. I want to get out of here alive, remember? Max nodded, then focused his energy on the sprinkler head right over the middle of the warehouse. He imagined it getting hotter and hotter, flames licking at it. Suddenly, it let go with a popping sound, and water flowed from it down on the people below. Before anyone could shout, more of the sprinkler heads popped and the alarms went off, but not all of the floor was being covered with water yet. They're in sections, Valenti said. You're going to have to trigger each section. Max focused on another area, heating the sensor until the area of sprinklers let off. Then he did it on the next, and then finally on the last. When he stopped, all the sprinklers over the warehouse were soaking everything below them with very special water. Alarms were ringing, people were shouting, and every guard at the door was looking very intense, guns at the ready as the water poured down on the green-skinned people unable to find shelter. Those poor people are in for a cold and wet night, Valenti said. The guards aren't letting them get to shelter, but they're not going to be happy anyway. Max said, noticing that on some of the wettest people, the green was almost gone, as if it was simply being washed off. Down below, a few started to notice the change, standing in the shower of water, welcoming it. Doctors ran out of a side door and into the water just as the downpour slowed and dropped to a trickle. Even over the fire alarms, Max could hear the laughing and shouting for joy as the green seemed to just vanish from everyone's skin. That's some strong stuff you put in that water, Tess said, smiling at Max. Decided to give it a double dose just to make sure, Max said. No point in taking any chances. So while all the fun is happening, Valenti said, any ideas about how we try to get out of here? Max shook his head, looking at the craziness on the warehouse floor below. Too many people moving too fast for Tess to control their thoughts. Let's just move around to a place on the balcony out of the way and away from the door and wait until things calm down. Valenti nodded, smiling. Sounds like a good plan to me. After all the climbing on the roof, I could use a rest. Max led the way, catching glimpses of very happy and very wet people below them. He really wanted them to all come down quickly and maybe be moved to a dry quarters. He was worried about Liz and Maria and Isabel and all the people with green skin in the hospital. He felt he and Tess and Sheriff Valenti needed to get there, but right now it was just too dangerous to even try. If there was one thing he was starting to learn, sitting and waiting was sometimes the best thing that he could do, and this was one of those times.
Chapter 15. Michael ran up the dirt road towards the cave. The night was lit up by the fires he had started on the other side of the shallow ridge, and he could see the water truck backed up to the cave, as well as the army tents and a dozen army trucks and jeeps just up the hill. A line of soldiers were standing on the top of the ridge, staring over at the fires on the other side, not paying any attention to the water truck behind them. At least his diversion was working so far. The air smelled of smoke and ash and burning tree sap. He could hear the flames crackle even from this distance. His lungs were burning. He was less than 100 paces from the truck when Alex finished dumping the water in the cave and scrambled for the passenger door. From the looks of it, their mission had been accomplished. The treated water was headed down into the water table. Now, if they could just get out of here alive. Kyle started the truck in motion towards Michael before Alex was even in the passenger side. At that moment, a soldier at the top of the ridge turned around and pointed. He might have also been shouting, but in all the noise from the explosions and truck engine, Michael couldn't hear him. Michael hoped no one else could either. Two of the soldiers with guns raised them, pointing them at the water truck. "Stop!" the shout echoed through the trees. That one Michael heard. He didn't much like the soldiers pointing rifles at the truck, or him. One stray shot into the old thing's gas tank and they'd all be burning. Summoning all the energy he had left, he aimed his explosive power at a tree trunk that was between the men with guns and the water truck. The tree trunk blew up like a bomb and hit it, sending the soldiers on the ridge scrambling for cover behind anything they could find. It would have been comical if it wasn't so serious. The explosion had been awfully close to them. Michael hoped the soldiers weren't hurt. Michael motioned to Kyle to keep going and not stop the big truck. It was still moving slow enough that he could get on. As Kyle passed, Michael grabbed onto the passenger side mirror and jumped up on the narrow running board, using the big water tank as shelter from the soldiers. Bullets ripped into the ground beside the truck. "They're shooting at us," Alex shouted. "They're what?" Kyle shouted, his eyes the size of saucers as he fought the old truck down the dirt road. Holding on tight with one hand, Michael aimed his power at one of the biggest army trucks. It was the closest one. He figured if those guys were stupid enough to shoot at people who were trying to help, then they were going to pay with a truck or two. Giving the energy an extra shove, he blew up the big truck. The explosion shook the air as the army truck lifted into the air, did a perfect half flip, and landed upside down. A moment later, its gas tank exploded, sending it spinning down the hill. That ought to slow them down some. But just to be sure, Michael managed to get enough energy to bring down a large tree across the road right behind them. "That won't stop them for long," he said, opening the door and swinging inside as Kyle pounded the truck towards the paved highway. "Which way?" Kyle shouted, the panic clear in his voice. "Turn away from town," Michael said. "I know where we can ditch this monster before anyone gives chase." And walk back to town? Alex asked, almost shouting over the loud engine. Are you kidding? I'm not walking back, Michael said, but we are going to have to put some distance between us and this truck. His throat was sore too. It hurt to talk. There had to be more smoke in the air than he could smell right now. He glanced behind him. The entire night sky was lit by the fires he'd started. He wondered how the Army would ever explain this one. Knowing them, they probably wouldn't even try. He took out a cell phone and waved at Kyle and Alex. We'll call for a ride when the coast is clear. If anyone's back yet, Kyle said, bouncing the truck onto the highway and heading away from the orange light of the fires in the forest, grinding gears as he gained speed. Oh, we won't call until morning, Michael said. Let's hope someone's back by then. Great, Alex said. A night in the cold. I should have dressed for it. Better than a night in jail, Michael said, watching the mirror to make sure no one was following. So far, the road was empty, but he knew it wasn't going to stay that way for long. Up ahead, Michael said, turn left off the highway and take the dirt road down towards the stream. Trees and brush will cover this beast from sight from the highway in the air. We're not more than a quarter of a mile from the Army, Kyle said. You want to stop now? And who will look for us in their back pocket? Michael asked. Besides, Alex said, we're not going to be able to outrun anyone in this thing. Michael nodded. He felt relief that Alex was along. When things got really tough, Alex always came through. So did Kyle, if Michael was being fair about it. Only with Kyle, the coming through involved a lot of complaining. The truck's shocks were shot. It bounced along. Michael felt like his teeth were going to rattle out of his head. Behind him, he heard more shouts and another explosion, probably some sap igniting. He was even more relieved now that the weather had been cool and damp. Even so, it would take the Army a long time to put out these fires, and they'd use a lot of water to do it. Anything that flushed the cure deeper into the water table helped right now. There, Michael pointed to the dirt road, and Kyle hit the brakes. He expertly swung the old water tanker off the highway and down the dirt road, bumping them far too fast over rocks and washouts. Slow down, Alex shouted. I want to live to get out of this cab. And then kill the lights, Michael said. Kyle slowed down enough to make out the road without the lights on, then slowly eased the truck through more ruts into a place under some trees, sheltered from the road. When Kyle shut off the engine, the silence seemed almost louder than the noise had. Michael could feel his heart pounding in the exhaustion from using his power so much. When he needed more than anything was a nap, but he wasn't going to get it anytime soon. The engine cracked and the tank behind them settled, the sound seemingly extra loud in the silence covering them. Michael's eyes were starting to adjust to the darkness. He could see the stream in front of them and the grassy meadow beyond. Well, I don't want to do that again, Alex said, sighing. I can't believe I was even involved, Kyle said. I feel sick. They were shooting at us back there. Am I going to have to pry your fingers off the steering wheel? Alex asked. Maybe, Kyle said, if my heart ever stops trying to hammer its way out of my chest. How did you know about this place? Alex asked. It looks nice. Maria found it, Michael said. Ask her how. The memory of the wonderful afternoon they had spent here last summer flashed in his mind. Now that memory was going to be replaced by this one. Too bad. I just might, Alex said with a grin. Okay, Michael said, his voice sounding almost too forceful in the darkness. We have to get moving. Kyle, give me your key. Give me the keys. We have to make sure they get back to your dad. Kyle took them out of the ignition. You want me to hold on to them for him? No, Michael said, barely seeing Kyle's face in the dark. In case we're caught, I don't want you to have them. That's too much of a direct line to your father. Michael saw Kyle nod in the dim light, then hand the keys over. Now we have to wipe down everything we've touched on this truck, Michael said, and some things we didn't. Why do that? Kyle said. Our fingerprints aren't on file, are they? Mine aren't. No, we need to do it to make it look more like a professional job, Alex said. Right? Exactly, Michael said. We want them to think it was someone with prints on file that took this, not high school kids. Oh, Kyle said. I'll hotwire the ignition, Michael said, to make them think there were no keys while you guys are wiping things down. Don't forget the valves in the back and the ladder to climb up on top. Kyle started to get out. Not yet, Michael said. He reached up, covered his fist in his jacket, and smashed the dome light over Alex's head, making sure the bulb was broken as well. Again, good thinking, Alex said, but you could have warned me. Sorry, Michael said. When did you become such a master criminal? Kyle asked. You seem to know all the tricks. When you grow up like I did, you have to learn to adapt, Michael said. Let's get to work. I want to be away from this truck as soon as we can. Yeah, so do I, Alex said. If I never see this thing again, I'll be happy, Kyle said. At least we got the water supply taken care of, Alex said. No more green people. Let's hope, Michael said. Above them on the highway, a police car flashed past, its red and blue lights flashing, headed in the direction they had been going. At the speed it was going, it wouldn't have taken long to catch this old truck. By sunrise, they were going to have to be a long ways away from here. That was for sure. And even then, they might not be safe. Liz was stunned at the change in the hospital that had occurred by the time she and Maria got the one cart out of the classroom where Isabel was being held prisoner. It seemed very quiet and somber. Now it was buzzing with excitement. Doctors rained on the hallway, and the intercom was calling out names to come to the emergency wing. Guess we caused a little stir, Maria whispered, laughing. Which way? The opposite of the one we came, Liz said. I don't think we want to be seen on that hallway again. Good point, Maria said. She headed off to the right, pushing the water cart ahead of her, looking in every door as they went. Do we still need both carts? Liz asked, as they walked along, ignoring the rooms with regular people in them. A glass of water with Max's plasma in it wasn't going to help the cancer patient. No, there's enough in here to do the trick, Maria patted the water container on the cart. We just need to find where they're keeping everyone. I'll bet that most of them are going to be in one place, Liz said, like Isabel, and the rest were being held in that classroom. Any room that big in the hospital that you know of? Maria thought for a moment as they stepped aside to let a nurse run past. Everything on the second floor is maternity and children's wards. The only place I can think of might be the lobby on the third floor. It's sort of a big atrium area with a cafeteria off to one side. Would it hold a few hundred people? Liz asked. Sure, Maria said. Then third floor it is, Liz said. There must be a lot of thirsty people up there, Maria said. I'm sure of it, Liz said, smiling. Liz was glad that Maria was keeping the mood light and the attitude good. It was helping her deal with the fear of getting caught. She didn't know why this bothered her so much, but it sure did, even though they were doing nothing illegal. It was more the fear of someone discovering what they were giving out and tracing it back to Max and the others. The elevator was empty, and they made it easily to the third floor. When they got off, they faced two men in army uniforms, both carrying rifles. Your business here? One soldier asked, his face frowning at the sight of them. Liz's stomach went right back into the twisted knot it had been in before they found Isabel. What does it look like? Maria asked, smiling at the guy. We have the wonderful task of making sure under doctor's orders that everyone gets exactly one glass of water. You want to help? No, the soldier said. Proceed. Thanks, cutie, Maria said. This time the soldier didn't respond, just stared straight ahead, looking past them. Liz watched as the other soldier managed not to laugh, but Liz wasn't sure how. Clearly the one guy was far, far into playing guard, and the second soldier found it funny. The second soldier winked at Liz when he saw her smiling. She could feel herself blush. She smiled back at him and moved on with Maria, the knot in her stomach again loosening. Flirting at a time like this? Maria asked, smiling at Liz with a twinkle in her eye. Any chance I get, Liz said, laughing. Around the corner, the hallway emptied into a large open area with dark skylights above. A few trees were growing out of some planters in the middle of the space. It would have been pretty if there weren't so many green-faced people lying and sitting around, all being watched over by stern-faced soldiers. Maria was still smiling at Liz when they rounded the corner, but when she looked around, she stopped dead cold. After a moment, she turned to Liz, then went back to moving the cart. Oh, we have a problem, Maria whispered, shoving the cart against one wall, pretending to get supplies off a lower shelf. What? Liz asked. This stuff works too fast, Maria whispered. We won't get through half of these people by the time the excitement starts, and then we'll never get to the others. Liz looked around at all the people sleeping on cots, sitting on benches, lying on blankets on the floor. There had to be well over 100 of them, at least, and half of them were asleep. They'd have to wake up to even get to... They'd have to wake them up even to get them to drink, or somehow put drops of water on their skin without anyone noticing. Maria was completely right. One drink, one person at a time wasn't going to work. Not even close. Any ideas? Maria asked, standing and looking out at the crowd of people. Not a one, Liz said. I was afraid you'd say that. They both just stood there, staring at what seemed to be an endless sea of green skin.
Chapter 16. Michael moved slowly around the old water truck in the dark, whispering to Alex and Kyle, wiping off things himself as he went. He and Alex both had gone over the interior of the truck, wiping down everything from the dashboard to the roof and seats. Now, with one final walk around the truck to make sure they hadn't missed anything, including the mirror he'd grabbed on the run, it was time to get away from here. Around them, the night was mostly still, the stars above the trees out clear and cold. At least a dozen police and military vehicles had sped past them in the last 15 minutes. And in the distance, the orange glow from the fires Michael had caused had died down and disappeared. That was good, because the last thing he'd wanted to do was start a forest fire. Would you look at this? Alex said, pointing at a spot on the back of the truck right above the valve that opened the water flow. A bullet hole. Not funny, Kyle said. A couple of feet down, it might have hit the gas tank, Alex said. Again, not funny, Kyle said. Michael glanced at where Alex was pointing and nodded. He's not being funny. That is a bullet hole. Let's get going. I can't believe I was shot at by army soldiers, Kyle said, staring at the hole, then turning to follow Michael. Believe it, Alex said. Just don't tell anyone about it, Michael said, as he worked his way carefully down the path towards the small stream, letting his eyes adjust even more to the darkness ahead. You think I'm that stupid? Kyle asked. I didn't say that, Michael said. Just no pillow talk, all right? At least until I'm a long ways from this town. We could get put away for a lot of years for what we did tonight, no matter how good our reasons were. Not counting what you did to those trees and trucks, Alex said, laughing. I don't have a girlfriend at the moment, and if I did, I certainly would admit to hanging out with you two hoodlums, Kyle said, sounding offended. Good, Michael said, leading the way down towards the stream and away from the road. Watch your step in the dark, Alex said. Twisting an ankle now would just about doom us. Great, Kyle said. Where exactly are we heading? I figure we have about 7 hours until sunrise, Michael said. We need to be over on Launder Road by then. Launder, Alex said. It has to be at least 3 miles across open desert. No chance, Kyle said. I've been out in that desert in the daylight. At night, it would be almost impossible. Do you have another idea, Michael asked, stopping behind the small stream and turning to face the other two. Behind them, the truck seemed like a large, dark shape looming in the night. The air was cold, biting at his nose, and he could see his breath in the starlight. On the highway, a cop sped past, his lights flashing, illuminating the trees around them with bright blues and reds. There are going to be robots going both directions, Michael said, and pretty soon they're going to start searching side roads. They'll find the truck by noon, I can guarantee that. We need to be sitting in the crashdown having breakfast by then, Alex said. Exactly, Michael said. And the only way I can see it happening is if we cut over to Launder Road and call to have someone pick us up. Launder Road goes into town a different way than this one does, Alex said. It won't have the roadblocks. That makes sense now that you mention it. Nothing about that desert out there makes sense, Kyle said. Trust me. Just watch your step very carefully, Michael said, and we'll be fine. He turned and jumped over the small stream, then headed up the trail on the other side towards the meadow where he and Maria had the picnic last summer. But this time he was going to go around the meadow, through the stand of trees and out into the rocks and brush of the desert beyond. At best, it was going to be a long night. He didn't want to think about the worst. The complete celebration and pandemonium of the warehouse had finally died down as aid workers came in with dry clothes, new bedding and blankets, and doctors checked over everyone they could reach who had once been green-skinned. For a good half an hour, the place had been like a circus. Max had moved Tess and Valenti back into the shadows of the balcony as a dozen half-soldiers came up and then climbed the ladder to the roof. Luckily, Max had relocked both the door to the water tank and the roof door, so it didn't seem as if anyone had been up there. After a short time, the men came back down, locking the trapdoor as they did, and went down the stairs. They don't have any idea what they're looking for, do they? Valenti asked. Nope, Max said, smiling. This had worked out better than he'd ever hoped it would. There was no doubt the army was going to hold these people for most of the night. And by the time morning came along and no one was turning green and there were no symptoms of any disease, they would all be let go. The army had no other choice in this matter. Holding them now would cause a stink that not even the army could live down. Max just hoped that Maria and Liz were having the same luck at the hospital. If not, this cure here was going to really confuse the issue with everyone there. His little voice kept telling him that he needed to get there to help them, even though he had no idea what was happening. Finally, after a good 50 aid workers and doctors had come and gone and come back again down below, Max couldn't stand waiting any longer. He turned to Tess. Are you up for making us appear as doctors again? I think I can do it, Tess said. if we watch the number of people we're facing. Let's go then, Max said. We need to get to the hospital and find out what's going on there. Worried, huh? Valenti said. So am I. That's not what I wanted to hear, Max said. With Tess leading the way by one step, they went down the stairs to the door at the bottom. As Tess stood nearby, Max eased the door open just a crack to see who was out in the main lobby. Only 2 soldiers at the moment. You ready? He whispered to Tess. She nodded, moved to a position where she could see the 2 soldiers through the crack, then opened the door wide and held it for the sheriff. Gentlemen, Valenti said, walking past the 2 guards as if he knew what he was doing. Tess and Max stayed very close behind. Valenti stopped as he opened the outer door. Doctors, he said. Thank you, Sheriff, Max said as he followed Tess out the door. Outside, there were 2 more guards and a few people standing a distance away near some cars. Only the 2 guards glanced their way, nodded, and went back to staring off in the distance. Tess must have gotten to them quick enough to do the illusion as well. This had to be very difficult for her. Valenti walked past Tess and Max, and the 3 of them moved at a steady pace across the open area in front of the warehouse to the corner of the next building and out of sight of the guards. Tess staggered, and Valenti caught her, keeping her walking towards his truck. Good job, Max said, moving around so he could be on the other side of Tess and help keep her moving. Are you going to be all right? Yeah, Tess said, her voice weak and raspy. I just need to sit down for a minute. They managed to get her into the truck, and a moment later, Valenti had it headed for the gate. It was clear to Max that Tess wasn't going to be able to hold 1 or 2 guards focused at the gate while they went through. They were going to have to try something else, and fast. Let's get down on the floor, he said, scooting down and then pulling Tess after him. I can do it, Tess complained, but didn't fight as Max helped her get as low as she could. Valenti headed to the truck towards the main exit to the face. Max knew that the guards at the gate seldom stopped outgoing traffic, especially someone like the sheriff who had checked in earlier. Now it would look like he was just leaving without the passengers he brought in, or at least that's what Max hoped it would look like. Max eased down into a lower position and stuffed his body around Tess's. You need to make sure if someone looks in, he said, talking into her ear. They see nothing. Will do, Tess said, nodding. Warn me, Sheriff, by clearing your throat. Okay, Valenti said. Stay down. We're almost there. Max moved his head all the way down and behind Tess, leaving her a clear vision if anyone looked into the truck on the driver's side. He didn't like lying there basically blind, but it was the best way at the moment. Valenti slowed, then waved and sped up. Passed us right through, he said after a moment. Stay down for another 10 seconds until we get far enough away. It felt good to be out of the base, Max said, working to help Tess start to climb off the floor and back up onto the seat. That it does, Valenti said. Good job in there, both of you. Thanks, Max said. But I have a hunch this night's not over yet. I'm headed for the hospital now, Valenti said. It's clear. Climb on up. Easier said than done, Max said, as he and Tess struggled to get untangled enough to climb up onto the seat of the truck. It felt strange being that close to her again. Almost normal and right. Not. She sure didn't seem to mind him touching her, that much was clear. And when they finally got back on the seat, she scooted against him and laid her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. For the entire distance to the hospital, he enjoyed the feeling of her being comfortable against him, a feeling that he'd only had before with Liz.
Chapter 17. Okay. Liz knew after 10 minutes of standing there, pretending to be getting the water cart ready, that they weren't going to come up with a way to get to everyone fast enough, no matter how much they thought about it. There just wasn't an answer. There were only 2 of them, far too many green-skinned people, and not enough time. Around them, the snores of some of the patients filled the large space. A few others paced along the wall, clearly not happy with being either green-skinned or trapped here. Many just sat and either read or stared off into the distance. I say we just go for it, Maria said. We spill, we shove, we dribble, and we get water on every one of them as fast as we can. Half of them are asleep, so we don't even wake them. We just walk by them dripping. Liz stared at the soldiers around the large hospital atrium. And we do this without being seen? Of course not, Maria said. We try not to get seen, but if we're fast enough, by the time anyone realizes it's the water, we're downstairs hiding. Liz again looked at all of the green people. A few doctors had come up, checked a few patients, and then gone back down the elevator. Clearly, the sudden cure of those green-skinned people in that one wing had everyone excited and focused down there, not up here. Okay, Liz said, let's do it. Remember, 1 drop on them is all we need, so don't drench anyone. Maria smiled. Not unless I have to. Great, Liz said, shaking her head. Her stomach was twisting so hard now she could hardly take a breath, yet somehow she had to smile, be polite, and move fast. You start down the far side, I'll go this way, Maria said, handing Liz a tray full of cups of water. Even though the small paper cups were only half full, the tray was surprisingly heavy. Liz took a deep breath. I figure we have about 10 minutes before the first signs really become clear, or maybe less. Keep going if we're close. I know, Maria said. She smiled at Liz. On your mark. Get set, Liz said back. Go, they both said at the same time. Liz turned and headed for the far side of the room, dipping her hand into one of the glasses to make sure there were enough drops on her fingers. As she passed the first sleeping man who was snoring in coughs and spurts, she dripped a few drops on his arm, then moved to the next man, doing the same, pretending to see if he was awake. The third person along the far wall was a woman reading a novel. Water, Liz said, holding a cup of water out to the woman to take. You need to drink it quickly. Why, she asked, not even glancing up at Liz as she reached for the cup. Liz hesitated just long enough that while letting the cup go, it sloshed a few drops on the woman's green hand. Doctor's orders, Liz said, moving on. She managed to drip some water on the 3 more sleeping people without being seen by any of the guards, sloshed 2 more cups of water on 2 more people clearly not interested in drinking, and then turned back down the second row. Across the room, Maria was making about the same progress. It seemed as if it was going slowly, far too slowly. They weren't going to make it to everyone. Maybe not even the center 2 aisles of people, depending on how much of a ruckus the first people made when they saw themselves turning color. Liz felt her heart was racing so fast it would explode out of her chest, and the knot in her stomach had become so hard she doubted she was ever going to be able to eat again. She followed the same routine along the second row of green patients, handing glasses to the ones who were awake, sloshing on many, dripping water on the sleeping ones as she passed. If she was being graded on her performance as a helper, she was failing. But so far, she had made sure everyone she passed had either drank some of the water or had water dripped on their skin. She was all the way to the end of the second row when the woman who had been reading her novel stood, moved over, and faced her. She was a good foot taller than Liz, about 10 years older, and was clearly very smart. She was smiling at Liz, her blue eyes almost laughing as she blocked Liz's way. Yes, Liz said, not sure what to do or say to the woman who was facing her. I've been watching you and your friend since you spilled that water on me, she said, too soft for the guard standing 10 feet away to hear. She held out her hand she had been covering. It was back to its normal flesh color. I don't know what you're doing, the woman said, and I don't care why you're not telling the doctors about it, to be honest, as long as it works and gets me out of here. It works, Liz whispered. You'll be back to normal skin color in about 5 more minutes. No side effects and no chance of the green skin coming back. Okay then, the woman said, nodding. You're going to need some help getting this done. Is that water over there in that container the same stuff you're using? The woman pointed to the cart. It is, Liz said, stunned that the woman was offering to help with the cure. Keep going then, the woman said. She headed for the cart. Liz watched her for a second and then glanced at Maria, who had this horrified look on her face. Liz gave her a thumbs up and went back to dripping water on the sleeping green people. The woman took a tray, filled about 10 paper cups, and starting down the center row between Liz and Maria, the row Liz was convinced they would never reach. It was clear to Liz and anyone who looked that the woman's arm was normal color as well as half her face, but none of the guards seemed to be noticing. A couple of the patients did, but she whispered something to them, and they took a cup and drank it without a word. One of them, a man in his middle 30s, even stood, went to the cart, grabbed more paper cups, filled them, and started helping as well. It was all just too amazing for Liz to believe. Those 2 clearly understood they were being cured by something not approved by the doctors, yet they were helping. They must have been really fed up with being held prisoner by the doctors and the army. A man that Liz had handed a paper cup to on the first row suddenly made a loud sound. The guy across from him, who was facing the room and watching, shushed him with a perfectly normal hand and arm. Liz didn't know what to do but keep going, dripping water on the sleeping ones, handing the others cups as fast as she could go. It seemed that a lot of people in the room were in on this event and making sure in one way or another it got done. Liz finished the row of people she was on, turned to go down the next row, and met the woman again as she finished. Around them, the room was growing louder with talking as more and more people realized they were being cured. A few of the guards started to stir as well, clearly not liking the fact that things right in front of them were changing. You 2 better get out of here, the woman said. I'll make sure that there wasn't anyone you missed. Thanks, Liz said, for the help. The woman laughed, high and clear and very happy. No, thank you. Liz smiled and turned and headed for the water cart. Leave the cart, Maria said, cutting in front of her and walking quickly toward the stairs. We just need to find a good place to hole up until things open up around here. I have a hunch we're going to be looked for. Liz couldn't agree more, but at the moment didn't much care. As the door closed behind them, the sounds were growing as more and more people realized their skin was turning from green back to its normal color. It was a great sound, that sound of joy, and it made Liz smile. Tez was almost back to normal by the time they reached the hospital, and Sheriff Valenti parked his truck in the lot across the street from the main entrance. It seemed that all Tez had needed was a little rest. Now she claimed she had no trouble getting them inside. Max didn't have any idea at all what to do now that they were at the hospital. Suddenly, with people coming and going and the army guards at the door, it didn't seem logical to just go in and start searching the building for Liz and Maria and Isabel. Yet he had to do something. He needed to know if they had been caught or if all the patients had been cured before he dared move. "You have your cell phone?" Max asked, turning to Tess. She nodded and dug it out of her purse, keeping her body pressed against Max's side as much as she could, as if gaining strength from him. He took it. Calling Liz's phone wasn't the best idea in the world because its ringing might get her in trouble, but it was the only idea he had at the moment. He had to know what was happening in there. He quickly dialed Liz's cell phone number before he changed his mind. It rang once, then Liz answered in a very tiny whisper. "Hello?" "Liz," Max asked, worried about the sound of her voice. Beside him, Tess moved away. "Good." "Max," Liz whispered, "Maria and I are hiding, so I can't talk any louder." "Where?" Max asked. "Why?" "In a laundry chute between the main floor and the basement laundry," she whispered. "We got everyone cured, we think, but a bunch of people saw us do it, so we're letting things calm down before we try moving around." "Good thinking," Max said. "We got everyone on the base cured as well." "Great," Liz whispered. "Maria wants to know if you've heard from Michael." "No," Max said, "but we haven't been back to the crashdown yet. Did you find Isabel?" "She's fine," Liz whispered. "Trapped in a classroom with a bunch of people, but fine." Suddenly, Max knew what had to be done next. If everyone with green skin had been cured in the hospital and on the army base, then the doctors needed to have an explanation for the press and for themselves to believe. And Max, with Tess's help, had just the thing for them. "Stay put," he said to Liz. "We'll bring you a change of clothes in an hour or so." "Great," Liz whispered. "Be careful." "You too," Max said and hung up. It was a huge relief that Liz and Maria and Isabel were all right. He handed the phone back to Tess, then turned to the sheriff and repeated all the news that Liz had told him. "So we have a successful night so far," Valenti said. "Now what?" "We get Liz and Maria a change of clothes so they don't stand out when they try to leave," Max said. "They were seen curing people with the water." "Oh," Valenti said. Max turned to Tess and put his hand on hers. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" She nodded, smiling at him. "I'm fine." "Can you try to plant ideas in a few doctors' minds, sort of like making someone believe we were doctors?" Tess nodded. "I think so. I could do it like an extended hallucination. It should last a few hours or maybe days." Depends on how much the doctors need to believe what you want them to believe or how close it is to the truth." "Something easy," Max said, smiling as he held Tess's hand, "and very close. How about we make them think the green skin was caused by a harmless microorganism in the water, sort of a green tide that came and went." "I like it," Valenti said. "So do I," Tess said, squeezing Max's hand. "So," Max said to the sheriff, "while Tess and I go in and make some suggestions to a few doctors, can you get our trapped friends a change of clothes?" "Gladly," Valenti said. "We'll meet you in the downstairs laundry room in about an hour," Max said. With any luck, the army troops should have been called off by then. "We can only hope," Valenti said. "That we can," Max said, opening the door and helping Tess out. "Well, doctor," he said to Tess, "are you up for a little visit to a friendly hospital?" "Ready as I'll ever be, doctor," she said, laughing. Together they turned and headed for the front door of the hospital to clean up the last few details of a very long night.
Doing the last chapter. Here we go. Chapter 18. The smell of bacon cooking in the crashdown was the best thing Max could remember greeting him in a long time. Bacon. I love bacon. Okay. The open sign was out, the sun was up, and a half dozen customers were sitting around the cafe, reading the paper and drinking orange juice. Michael was in the kitchen talking to the day cook, and Alex and Kyle were sitting in a booth sipping coffee. They both looked tired, dirty, and very beat up. "Success?" Max asked Alex. Liz, Tess, Maria, Isabel, and the sheriff followed Max to the door. "Success," Alex said, smiling, "but at a price." Max didn't like the sound of that, but with normal customers in the restaurant and the day waitress 2 booths over helping a nice couple, he wasn't going to press. Michael came out of the kitchen, also looking beat up and tired. He reached into his pockets and tossed the sheriff a set of keys. "Thanks. Don't mention it," the sheriff said, smiling. "Oh, trust me, I won't if you won't," Michael said. He looked at Max, shook his head, and went back into the kitchen. Now Max was really worried, but at least they were all here, and the treated water was in the ground. "Ready to go home, son?" Valenti asked Kyle. "I'm ready to go home and stay home," Kyle said, slowly easing himself out of the booth and limping towards the door. The sheriff held the door open for his son, a puzzled expression on his face. Max just shrugged, and the sheriff quickly moved to open the truck door for Kyle. "What happened, you guys?" Maria asked. "You don't want to know," Alex said, "and we don't want to tell you at the moment." Oh, Liz said, that bad, huh? She slipped in beside Alex. Yes, Alex said, trying to sip his coffee with shaking hands. Marie sat in the booth across from him. Tess took a spot at the counter while Isabel slid into the booth next to Maria. Max decided to stand so he could see everyone. At the moment, he wanted everyone's story, but he knew that with regular customers listening, he was going to have to wait. I'm assuming, Alex said, looking around, from your smiling faces, that the night was a success. Completely, Max said. The doctors discovered the green skin was caused by a harmless microorganism. The paper is calling it the green tide and making fun of it. Tess winked at him and he winked back. It felt good to work so closely with Tess. He wasn't sure why, and he wasn't sure he wanted to push it farther than that. The future would tell on that score. Sorry. It wasn't much fun being locked up in a classroom all night, though, Isabel said. Boring beyond belief, and I don't think Rob's ever going to want to date me again. After he turned green on the first one, why would he? Alex asked. Must not have been too rough a night, Maria said. Your sense of humor is coming back. I just rode 10 miles in the back of a horse trailer, Alex said. I have no sense of humor. Alex said, I have no sense of humor. Or smell, Maria said. Isabel and Tess laughed. Max couldn't help but grin himself. He was feeling very good that they had escaped this problem mostly intact. It could have been a lot worse. But Alex had yet to see the humor in the morning or the previous day's events. His face turned slowly red under the dirt. Yesterday afternoon, my entire body was green. His voice carried for the entire restaurant. Every inch of my skin was that color. I don't find anything funny about that. Sorry, Maria said, trying to calm Alex and get him to lower his voice. Nothing to be sorry about, Alex said. You know what it felt like, but just tell me what I would have done if the color would have stayed. Maria and Isabel both shrugged. Come on, Alex said. You have all the answers. How would I have managed for the rest of my life if the green skin had become permanent? Max glanced around the cafe. Sitting in the back booth was a black couple, both listening and drinking coffee. 2 stools down from Tess was a Native American, also clearly listening. And at the cash register, waiting for someone to take her money, was a woman with bright red hair. None of them offered an answer to Alex's question, although Max was sure each of them had one. And that is the end of Little Green Men.
Yay.
Yay, awesome. It's a good one. I enjoyed it. I got home perfect timing to I was listening
that we got at the end. I was like, no,
yeah,
stop it.
Yeah.
So the next one, no more
You're not
tests.
supposed to enjoy this, Max. Stop it.
Right. No more tests. No more Alex and right before. This is all before season 3, after she leaves.
Okay.
So Liz is pissed. We got a lot of angry Liz in this because we don't get to see that in the show at all. So we're gonna see a lot of her questioning her feelings for Max, up and down, up and down. So there's a lot of that. So it's gonna get interesting.
Okay. What's our next book? Or have we decided what the next one is that we're gonna read?
Dates.
Okay, I think Jody sent me that so I can read along. That's good. Yeah.